I saw a comment from an NBA coach who said that they're not going to limit how much one of their players practices because you wouldn't limit how much a child reads. And one, I think that's a dangerous analogy, trying to compare a professional athlete practicing in a very physical sport with a child reading. Um, I don't have my own child, so I don't know if I would limit my child's reading, but I do know parents who do limit their child's reading because they need to spend time doing their chores or spending time with their family or getting outside and playing or getting some kind of physical activity. So they do actually limit how much their child who really does like to read all the time, they will limit the amount of time that they can spend reading because they want them to do other things as well. So I also think in some ways that is an incorrect analogy because parents do limit time spent reading. Um, but beyond that, I think the idea that simply a huge volume of practice is what we're aiming for is the wrong goal or objective. Instead, I think we need more focused practice and a higher level of practice, more mindful, more concentrated. Because if you just get a lot of practice, um, that doesn't say how you're practicing. And if you're on the court a lot, one of the big um, things that K. Anders Ericsson said in his books is, and he's the father of deliberate practice, is that deliberate practice tends to take place in 90 minutes or less because it is very hard and very difficult to maintain concentration for any longer period of time. And so if we're just aiming for lots of practice and a huge volume of practice, a lot of times that practice becomes mediocre. And it's done without concentration, it's done without mindfulness, and the physical intensity reduces. And so now, to a certain extent, what are you practicing? Well, you're on the court, and that may be better than nothing. But if you have this huge volume of practice, now also you're developing fatigue that potentially could affect your game on the next day, or especially in the NBA over a long season. Long practice sessions on days off or even before games, could eventually lead to more and more fatigue as the season goes along if these behaviors continue. And so rather than thinking about, well, how much practice, and we're not going to limit the amount of practice that our players have, in one sense that's a good thing. We want to encourage players to practice, especially younger players who tend not to practice that much on their own, and maybe only get 2 to 4 to 6 hours of practice a week with their youth or high school team. They can probably afford to leave a practice and then go home and shoot some more, or on the days where they don't have practice, go out and shoot on their own, or play some pickup games with friends or whatever. The NBA, of course, is different with the amount of fatigue from travel, the huge number of games, the length of the season, and so to allow players to just practice whenever they want and potentially however they want doesn't really say anything about whether they're going to improve through that practice. And so if you're simply doing a lot and thinking that by doing a lot I'm going to automatically get better, to a certain extent we're missing the point of what we're trying to accomplish with practice, and that is to improve performance. And so if we're creating a more fatigued athlete who's practicing without concentration or mindfulness, maybe without the same physical intensity because of the fatigue, what are we practicing? How are we expecting that athlete to improve? So at every level, I would want more concentrated, shorter duration practices, ideally, with better concentration and higher intensity. And if we want to get a greater volume, then ideally we have multiple sessions. So, we work out maybe, for 45 minutes to an hour, and then we rest all day, and then we work out again. Obviously, that's really not possible, especially not like a high school setting. But during an off season, that is possible. You could practice, on your own in the morning and with your team in the evening or something like that, and be able to maximize the amount of practice with concentration and with effort. And so I just thought that that analogy, the analogy was poor. Comparing it to reading, I do think parents will limit reading for other reasons because there are other things to do in life besides read a book, just as there are other things for a professional athlete to do besides get on the court by himself and shoot around. And I think just aiming for volume is the wrong aim. We should be aiming for improvement. And the best way that we can get that improvement would be more distributed practice, so more sessions of shorter duration. Obviously variable and random practice, which may or may not be possible depending on the practice situation. But then also, making sure the players are fresh for games so that they're in the best physical condition to perform.